Welcome everybody. My name's Howard Long. Welcome to Midweek Devotion this week. It's good to be with you. This is the time of year when us farmers plant our winter pastures in the autumn. Before it gets too cold, when the mornings start to get a bit cooler and the sun's not too hot, we put our winter pastures in. It's quite an exciting time of year. I love it. You prepare the land, you put down fertilizer, you make a seed bed, and then you put down the seed and you see all this seed germinating. And I'm standing in one of those pastures here. You can see all the green around me, and the seeds growing and coming through, and just now it's going to be a carpet of green grass. It's a lovely time of year. Jesus often used farming like that as an illustration in his parables. He often used those to teach people the truths about what he was teaching. And when I see a pasture like this and the seeds growing, it reminds me so much of Matthew 13 and the parable of the sower who went out to sow his seed. But quite different in those days. Didn't have a big tractor to prepare the ground, didn't have a tractor and a seed drill to plant the seed. He would go out throwing the seed out by hand over the land, walking up and down that land and making that seed as even as possible. But as he spread it, some of the seed would land in different areas. And that's what he spoke about as he told us about that, because all land is not just good soil. There'd be hard patches, there'd be weedy patches, there'd be rocky areas. And Jesus spoke about that with the seed that went out. It's amazing when you've got a hard patch, a pathway in your field. The day before you plant, there's not a pigeon in sight. And the day after you plant, there's hordes of them come in and pick all those seeds off the surface. And that's what happens. When the seed lands on the hard ground, the birds come and they eat it. And it was there, and it's got potential, and then it's just taken away. And it has no chance. And then there's the shallow soil, the soil that's nice on top, but underneath is hard. And those seeds germinate, but their roots can't get down into the moisture. So as soon as there's any heat like we've had these last few days, because they've got no roots down in the ground, those seeds would not make it. They would battle, and they'd wilt and die. And then there'd be the ones that went into the grassy areas, into the weeded areas, and those weeds would choke them, because when the seeds came up, the weeds and the grass were already established, and those little seeds wouldn't be able to get any moisture because the weeds have already taken all that moisture up. And then Jesus went on to explain the parable, and he said those seeds are like us. We have the opportunity in our lives quite often to hear God's word, maybe from a friend, maybe from a family member, maybe on a book or an email or a podcast or a WhatsApp. We have this opportunity to hear God's word. But hearing it's not enough. Hearing it doesn't do anything for us. Andy Stanley often speaks about people that go to church and want a credit for going to church, and you don't get any credits for going to church. Well, not much. You get credit for when you put into practice what you hear. You can't phone your dad and say, "Dad, I went to church on Sunday," and think you've done the right thing. God saw me there, tick that box, I went to church. It's when we go into God's house and hear his word, and his word changes us. And some people can go to church all their lives and hear God's word all their lives, but unless that word is affecting them, it's having no effect on their life. And that's like the seed on the hard ground. That seed dropped on the hard ground, but nothing happened. It didn't grow. It was taken away. And then there was the seed in the shallow soil, in the weedy soil, and that shot up and it germinated. But as soon as that hot wind, that hot temperature like we've had these last few days, as soon as that came, they couldn't stand. The busyness of life, the deceitfulness of wealth choked them. I thought that's such good words that Jesus chose when he used them there, because wealth is deceitful. We think it's going to satisfy us, we think it's going to be a blessing, we think it's going to bring us peace, and it doesn't. And we get involved in all these things, and they take us away from God, and we have to be careful about that. I have to be careful about that. I've got to be careful. The things that I enjoy Don't take me away from my God, that I make time for my God so that my roots can go down. And then there's the seed that went on the good soil. And the seed that went on the good soil grew up, and it produced a crop, and it put its roots down. And today, if you came out here at 2 o'clock in the day, at the heat of the day, you'd find these little tiny plants were standing up because they had their roots down into the moisture. Even though the soil is dry at the moment, because we haven't had rain for a while, but they were able to stand, they were able to survive. I feel sorry for those seeds on the hard ground, because they didn't choose to be there. When they got thrown out by the sower, and some landed on hard ground and some landed in the weeds, they didn't choose that. That's where they ended up, and they battled because of that. The ones that landed on the good soil were able to grow. But we have a choice. We have a choice where we position ourselves. We have a choice where we're gonna be. Are we in a place where we can grow, be fed, be encouraged, where we're going to learn, or are we in a place where we're shaded out by the busyness of our lives, by the activities that go on around us, or maybe the people that we associate with? We have to make a choice. We have to choose where we're going to be so that we can put our roots down into God's word, and we can grow, and we can be strong, and we can be a blessing. So, we have to make a decision. And sometimes we have to look carefully at our lives and let God speak into our lives and say, be careful about what you're watching. Be careful about what you're reading. Be careful about who we're associating with, because all those things affect our lives. But when we open our lives to God's word, he speaks into our lives. He speaks wisdom. He speaks peace. He grows us if we put our lives into his hands. And then when that hot wind blows, when that temperature is hot like it was today and over the weekend, we will be able to stand. We live in such challenging days. I've never known a time when everybody around me is facing difficulties, is facing hardships, is facing things that are really hard. But our God is faithful. I was reading in Deuteronomy 31 verse 8, and it said, as your God, I will go before you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And that's great how God is there for us and God helps us. But where are we? Are we positioning ourselves in a place where God can go with us and be with us? Or have we moved away? Are we rooted close to God where we can grow? Or are we in the shade where our roots can't go down because we're in shallow soil? We have to let God into our hearts, into our minds, into our lives, so that he can affect us. So I was putting this together. I remembered those words in Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 8. If you hear my word today, if you hear my word, don't harden your heart. Don't reject my word. And when we hear God's word, we have to accept it. We have to think about it. We have to let it have an effect on our lives. Like those seeds, when they get to the ground, they've got to put their roots down so they can grow. We have to do that as well. God bless you as you put your trust in your God. Make sure you're planted in an area where you're being fed, where you're being challenged, where you can grow. If you're not, it's time to move. And put yourself under God's word so he can speak into your life. He can grow you so you can produce a crop, be an encouragement to other people around you, and give glory to our God. God bless. Thank you.